I'll go with Janet Yellen, who was chairman of the Fed before becoming Treasury Secretary. She said, and I'm not quoting her exactly, but she said the risk of inflation is pretty low. We need a big, bold, and even multi-trillion-dollar bill. Yeah, I think what he's trying to do is he made a bold proposal here, $1.9 trillion. And you know what, Neil, I'm glad he did. Because you know what sometimes Democrats do? We negotiate against ourselves. Why not present a bold vision for this proposal? And then I think ultimately a second proposal that's focused on jobs in the economy almost exclusively in the caregiving economy. But for now, on COVID, I think it was smart for him to make a bold proposal. Now,
you know, even Senator Joe Manchin has raised eyebrows about the size of the package and whether the stimulus checks will go out to people who don't, for example, need them or deserve them, that it should be focused and targeted. And that's a big concern of his. That sounds like a potential early no Democratic vote. Are you concerned?
Well, when you're trying to get relief to a lot of people that are hurting, and especially people who live in communities of color, low-income folks who have suffered disproportionately with regard to the virus, higher cases, higher death numbers, higher unemployment, all kinds of calamities hitting communities at the same time. I think it's important to get big and bold relief out there. I would err on the side of something too big as opposed to trying to be so targeted that you miss having the impact. The good news is on the $1,400 is it has a stimulative effect as well. We want people to use that to buy food. We still have record numbers of people going every day without food. People in food lines have never been in those lines in their lives. So I would rather, you know, to use an expression, punch that COVID challenge and punch down the unemployment numbers so we can jumpstart the economy. I think it's the risk of doing too little is much higher than the risk of over appropriating, so to speak.
If I'm going to offend you, sorry, I'm about to offend you. I don't think eliminating your estate tax is worth costing the country $25 billion every year. I don't think that's worth it.
Secondly, when it comes to his newfound concern about fiscal responsibility, this is the same guy that ran that debt number up to, by the end of this year, $10 trillion. In fact, you know, that debt clock that they have, they're going to have to add another digit. I'm not sure what kind of engineering that's going to take, but adding another digit
will take an earmark
because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The administration before him was not just stabilizing the debt number; the number was actually going down, and now it's gone up by about $4 trillion or more than $4. So I couldn't believe that he's going to try to lecture others about fiscal responsibility when he's the $10 trillion man now.
They ran up the debt, gave huge subsidies to big oil companies, and now they're asking for 4 more years. How about 4 more months? We can't afford 4 more years of deficit and debt and drift in desperation. Not 4 more years, 4 more months.
I'm the only candidate here who has a plan on the table to reduce the deficit over 10 years by $1.3 trillion.
Mr. Case,
he does it
by spending $1 trillion more dollars.
It's a very important question in this campaign because there's only one person on this platform tonight who's voted time and again for those big deficits, and it's Rick Santorum. He's voted for budgets that have not just taken a record surplus of 236 up in surplus down to a deficit which is about 250 now, and it's gone higher than that. He voted for that. He voted to incur more indebtedness to foreign governments, more than $1 billion more right now to foreign governments around the world. $1 trillion, and another $1 trillion in indebtedness. And here's the problem with that. That makes us more dependent upon those countries. It puts us at their mercy when we're trying to increase spending for homeland security, terrorism, and some of the things he talked about.
I think on our side, and I'm going to be able to say this as a candidate, we've delivered over and over again, but we know we have more work to do. I think that one of the things we're seeing just in the last 48 hours is not just that that contrast in terms of record job growth, 15 million jobs across the country. I see it in Pennsylvania all the time, as well as the economic standing of our families. But I think what the president spoke to in his State of the Union address about working on lowering costs for families, whether it's lowering the cost of insulin by a lot way down to $35 a month for seniors, or whether it's taking on greedflation and shrinkflation.
What's your position on gun control?
Well, I don't think we need further restrictions on gun ownership. I think that this state, as you know, really led the country when we eliminated the gun show loophole. We've had laws in the books for years that the intent of which, if they're enforced, keep guns out of the hands of children, and we should make sure that we vigorously enforce those laws. But I don't think new gun control laws are going to have any impact. I think it would have an adverse impact on the right to bear arms across Pennsylvania.
Tim, when you have two politicians in Washington that agree 98% of the time, one of them's really not necessary.
When two people agree 98% of the time, one of them's not necessary. You vote with the president 98% of the time.
We need someone who's going to be truly independent, who has the character and the integrity to stand up to his party and his president. He doesn't want to talk about his own record, which is voting with the president 98% of the time. I think what the people of Pennsylvania expect and deserve is someone who's going to be independent, truly independent. He really thinks that the next 6 years should be more of the same. More of the rubber stamping 98% of the time. As a United States Senator, you should not act as a rubber stamp for either party.
All you can do is look backwards, and that's 98% with the president.
Being a rubber stamp for the President of the United States is not in the best interest of the people of America.
You know, one of the raps on you, certainly encouraged by the senator, is that you're lazy, essentially resting on the laurels of your great father's good work and handpicked by national Democrats to run for this particular office. As you know, the Philadelphia Inquirer did document days missed from Harrisburg, and it seems to some that you're not as active or visible on the campaign trail as the senator is, or hit the talk shows like he does. Now, I know you'll reject this characterization, but how about some specifics? Isn't there more than a grain of truth in what the senator says?
I don't think there is.
We've all seen Mr. Barletta's ad, presumably photoshopped, showing you asleep on the job and suggesting that you are one of the least effective senators on Capitol Hill. Now, you've been in the Senate for 12 years, but when you go out on the street and talk to people and ask them, what has Senator Casey done, they blank. What is it? Is that a fair measure of your performance in the Senate? Or is there something specific that you can point to that you're most proud of that most of us in Pennsylvania may not be aware of?
Mr. Casey, you have called yourself an independent senator, but in fact you have voted with the president on the big ticket items, on health care, the economic stimulus, on the auto bailout. What areas do you differ with President Obama?
There's no reason why we shouldn't be following the lead of President Biden.
What would you have Joe Biden do to make the case that he's not an elderly, well-meaning gentleman, that he's somebody who's really driving the car?
Well, I think his record demonstrates that, and I think people are going to see it in the campaign.
How do you feel about the president and whether or not he's sharp enough and physically strong enough to do another 4 years?
No question he's prepared to do this job today and would be were he reelected.
Asked if he still thinks Biden can run a strong race and serve a second term.
Yes and yes. Got serious about tackling the virus. I have one question for the president on the virus. You have to wonder, would Donald Trump have gotten the coronavirus if President Trump did a better job tackling the virus?
Opioid drugs such as prescription painkillers and heroin. There is an effort now to open the state's first so-called safe injection site, a place where people could actually use illicit drugs under medical supervision. Do you support safe injection sites? If not, what are your proposed solutions in addressing the opioid crisis?
Well, just on the question itself, I need to know a lot more about how that will work. So I'm not going to support something like that till I know a lot more about how it would work.
There's no question that there's systemic racism throughout our criminal justice system broadly, which goes back generations. but certainly in policing, as there is in a lot of other parts of our society. And again, I think as someone who speaks from a position of white privilege and, in my case, male privilege, and maybe the privilege of being an elected official, which sometimes can create real distance between those you serve. I had to examine my own conscience, to use an old expression from my Catholic school days, to examine whether I was doing enough. And the answer came back pretty quickly that I wasn't. So I've got more work to do. And just like in the context of criminal justice and policing, it won't be good enough for us to have police accountability and to try to tear out by the roots the systemic racism that's in our criminal justice system, just as it is in society at large.
The senator also joined protesters in kneeling for 9 minutes, symbolic of the time former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's.
There's no way that I could fully understand. I have lived a different life, and I've had privileges, white privilege if you want to call it that, that has never had I've never had the kind of barriers in my way or obstacles to overcome that they've had to overcome. And I think it's important that we understand that.
Casey and Lancaster Mayor Deneen Sarachi also knelt with protesters to remember George Floyd. Lynch said Monday's meeting gives him hope something will change.
And so I think it starts there. We have to ask ourselves, not only what are we doing, or the other question is, what have we tolerated? We have tolerated systemic racism in so many areas of our lives. Not the most obvious is in criminal justice and policing, but it's not limited to that. That's the harsh reality here. There's systemic racism in housing, in education, in healthcare, in terms of economic opportunity, even in terms of the environment. If you live in a community of color that is low income, if you have both of those kind of circumstances, that there's a higher likelihood that the environment within which you live is more dangerous, that the air is dirtier, and that there are other environmental hazards that folks who live in a neighborhood like mine don't have to worry about, or don't have to worry about as much. But it should also shame us individually. We should be ashamed that we haven't done enough, those of us who are elected officials. So that leads you naturally into supporting the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, to finally have accountability, to not just say over and over again, well, if we have more training, that will fix the problem. No, it won't.
And the federal government can't come in and come up with a magic wand that'll wipe away all debt. But there are some things we can do. Not that you can reach a point where no student has any debt. Getting everybody down to zero is probably highly unlikely. But
havoc, but to come into the Capitol to stop the counting of electoral votes, to upend the government. They were engaged in a coup, a violent coup, frankly, based in white supremacy. I think that's as clear as could be. It was like a demonstration of white supremacy in the Capitol, because they were mad that we were doing well in a lot of states where black voters were helping us win.
But I think we got to make the case day after day, because at the core of these voter suppression laws, in my judgment at the state level, is white supremacy. Simple as that.
Right. God bless our work, and happy Pride Month. Thanks, everybody. The fight to prevent the erasure of queer history, and the fight to ensure that LGBTQ individuals can access and enjoy the full measure of human rights, and to make sure that efforts to undo those basic rights and efforts to erase that history are stopped in their tracks.
Yeah, I think we should view the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ plus Americans as part of a continuum or a steady stream of legislation over a couple of generations now that kind of widened the circle of protection for and validation of the rights of Americans. And I think it's entirely consistent. The Equality Act is entirely consistent with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act, and so many other pieces of legislation over time where we were providing protections against discrimination to Americans that didn't have that protection before. I mean, it's still hard to comprehend that even with the great and really fast-moving progress we made on marriage equality, it's still the case in the United States of America in most places that you could be married on Saturday or Sunday, but get fired from your job on Monday without much recourse because of your sexual orientation or because of some other reason that they invented. So that's the reality, and it will just provide the same kind of protection against discrimination that we had in those earlier, especially the 64 Civil Rights Act, where it focused on housing, on public accommodations, on education, so that you don't have people denied opportunities. In the first case in 1964, because of the color of their skin, and we know that there's still that's still a challenge where we have to address now. But you also don't want people to be denied opportunities and discriminated against because of who they are and whom they love.
Because it also validates what the New York Times and Washington Post and other papers were saying. They would make a major revelation about the Mueller investigation. The president would call it fake news, and all his minions would say it was fake news. And then Mueller would rely upon that news story, and then the news story would be corroborated by Mr. McGahn and Mr. Lewandowski. I mean, so we now know how accurate they were, exceedingly accurate, over and over and over again.
It is wrong to deport 11 million people, rip them away from their families. Finally fixing our system so that we can stop drugs from coming in at points of entry and give people a path to citizenship.
And a wall should not be confused with border security. No serious expert would recommend a wall. Even the most ardent supporters of a major border security initiative would not make the case seriously that a concrete wall would be the answer. But
what is your response to that? I mean, is the situation to any degree a result of signaling from the Biden administration?
Al, it's good to be with you. No, the answer is no. Bill Cassidy's wrong, and I think he probably knows that if he would examine the two approaches both administrations have taken. Look, the Trump administration left us a mess.
just since I talked to you last week, the president's back to wall, wall, wall. Yeah. So, I mean, if he wants a concrete wall over more than 1,900 miles, I don't think there's going to be much support for that. So anybody in Washington who goes around and puffs their chest up and says, we're going to be tough on the borders, if they've been there for several years or many years, they've got a lot of explaining to do.
Another issue is that if our immigration patterns go down, we're not going to have the resources we need for Social Security.
The Climate Change Workers Assistance Program. In short, what this program will do is make sure that workers who are adversely affected will have wages, they will have health care benefits, and they will have the intensive training that they need to make the transition that will happen to some of our workers. Now, there's a lot of talk about costs of this bill, and there's no question that there are costs. He thinks we can drill our way to energy independence. I think that's ridiculous. We've got to have mandatory reduction of carbon emissions. Unfortunately, the counterproposal in this chamber and across the street, so to speak, or down the street in the House, is to simply drill our way to energy independence. We know that'll do nothing to lower gas prices. Ignoring climate change undermines United States national security. First and foremost, the Obama administration was right to bring forth the Clean Power Plan. We should be supporting that. The administration and the Republican Congress is against that. That's one of the best ways to combat climate change. We should also rejoin the Paris Climate Accords that the President pulled us out of.
Well, I think what we do is to do a lot of what I've already tried to do, which is, number one, support the Clean Power Plan, which is under assault now. We need help from everybody in this state who believes in that plan to stop both, and this isn't just the Trump administration. Of course, you've got the far-right members of the United States Congress, and a lot of those, who want to take out the Clean Power Plan as well. And we're going to have to fight very hard just to stop them from doing that.
Collective future. And together we can do this. We know we can do this. America has always been able to confront difficult challenges, whether that challenge was a depression or a world war or any challenge presented to us. We can meet those challenges just like we're meeting the challenge that is global warming. Of the legislation. Let's just say that they're trying to make their point about gas prices. If they're so concerned about gas prices today, why don't they support, as we've tried to push on this side of the aisle, strategies to bring down that cost, or to, at a minimum, to provide some measure of relief to our families? How about a windfall profits tax? People are really worried about gasoline prices. Why don't the critics of the bill support that? Why don't the critics of the bill, if they're so worried about families and gas prices, and not only support a windfall profits tax, but support measures that we have introduced already, and I hope we can have a vote on this, to focus on excessive speculation that's in the market right now. So there's a lot we can do right now to bring down the cost of gasoline, or at least try, but it seems that the other side of the aisle wants to talk about bringing gas prices down and don't want to do it. And I think that this Climate Security Act is one way not only to deal with our energy challenges, but to do our best to protect God's creation, to enhance our national security, and to create lots and lots of jobs for our families and for our future. The agreement enhances our national security and also enhances the security of Israel and the region. I believe any president would. We have to make sure that we put in place policies that will strengthen that deterrence. I think this agreement enhances that deterrent effect rather than undermine it.
Should be amended, or do you think it should be scrapped?
I voted for it, and I think it was the right decision to vote for it. I undergirded my decision with a lot of kind of guiding principles, which I'll mention in a moment. But I think you could have voted against the Iran agreement originally and still be in favor of keeping it in place. I think that's actually true. But I really believe that the United States will be more secure, the region, including Israel, will be more secure with the agreement as opposed to without it.
Let me ask you about
In 1975, we went from 67 votes to 60 votes. There's plenty of precedent for changing this rule. So we're going to aim to do it so we can stop the obstruction and get a good voting rights bill passed into law.
Why? Why did this happen when many of your GOP colleagues expressed support for exactly this kind of commission in the weeks after January 6th? Do they not want the truth here? Are they afraid about the political damage?
Well, Jim, I think it's as simple as this. You've got an entire political party in Washington, not across the country, but in Washington, that are still genuflecting to Donald Trump. Simple as that. And they don't want to do anything that offends him. And it's an insult to the country. It's an insult to our democracy, our national security. What would be the event that would cause them to have a bipartisan commission? What if the terrorists who came into the Capitol were able to actually get to Vice President Pence and kill him? That was their intention, or to kill a member of Congress. Would that be enough? Would it be? Is there something else that would get them there? It just makes no sense. But it's a continual effort to genuflect to one man instead of the rule of law.
What do you think
Neil,
of this back and forth on this 1619 project, sir?
Well, Neil, look, I think at a time when we're debating big ideas about how to lift our economy out of the ditch and how to recover from the pandemic, I think we should be debating issues that that most Americans are focused on in their daily lives, not what the Department of Education is going to do in proposing curriculum or ideas for our history. But if we're going to have the debate, I think it's really important to talk about some of that history, the history that a lot of us learn. Now, Senator Marshall and I, he's a new senator, and he's a very nice guy and a brilliant doctor, and he and I were born the same year. As white males, we've had a pretty good deal for the last 60-some years. But if you're not a white male in America, over many, many generations, it's been brutal for so many families, and I think we should learn more about that history and make sure that our children learn more. I think both of us are just learning things that we didn't learn in school. And I was just looking at the New York Times 1619 publication. Here's like the 5th page of it. You can't see it, but that's a picture of a lynching in 1910. That's of almost 50 years after slavery. I didn't know a lot of this history. So it's important that we learn it, because we can't be the country we say we are and try to be a more perfect union unless we learn the whole history. And a lot of that history, unfortunately, is about racism and about white supremacy. Children need to be exposed.
There's no doubt about that, Senator, and I get what you're saying here, and including information on lynchings and the rest that define, sadly, so much of our experience in this country, even after the Civil War. All valid, all advisable to include, but to then go back to 1619 as the starting point of looking at the American history experience through the prism of just slavery. That's a whole nother matter, is it not?
No, I don't think it is. Look, 1619 is a year that where the discussion should start. That's where it started, and I think we need to know that. I think a lot of Americans.
Well, where would 1776 fall into that discussion?
Neil, we have a lot of history about 1776, and a lot of it's very valuable to learn. We can learn about the founding fathers. We can be inspired by their words and things they did, but also highlight and learn about mistakes that they made. Look, we know that the Constitution has some lies in it from the very beginning in terms of, all men are created equal, or the Declaration and the Constitution. We know that some of the terminology, some of the precepts in there weren't based upon truth, and I just think that children should learn that.
Do you accept one of the key points of the 1619 Project is that the whole Revolutionary War itself was predicated on slavery? Do you accept that as a given, as does the 1619 Project?
I don't think there's any question that we should be reviewing our history from that vantage point in ways that a lot of us were not exposed to. And then at the end of the debate or the end of the exposure to that education, people can make their own mind up and draw conclusions. But to just erase or sideline a lot of history, I think just perpetuates the kind of white supremacy that is, I think, too often dominated not just our history and our culture, but even our government.
So you're essentially saying that we don't adequately discuss slavery or cover it enough in classes. I mean, it gets a good deal of attention in curriculum when you talk about events that led up to the Civil War and the horrific period you talked about, Senator, after that. You don't think it's adequately addressed as things stand now?
No, and I base it upon my own. I had a great education, but there are a lot of gaps in it because most schools don't teach this history. And Neil, I think it's more than just slavery itself; it's all that came after, and the adverse impact. I'm just holding a book here. I just started reading this book recently, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander. I should have read this book 10 years ago when it was published. I'm just learning more about it, but so much that happened after Reconstruction was obliterated, and it was the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And then they were knocked down, and then they rose up again. So, look, we've got to learn this history. A lot of Americans don't know it.